There is a particular kind of exhaustion that deep thinkers know well, and it has nothing to do with physical tiredness. It's the exhaustion of a mind that never fully stops, that processes everything at a level most people don't reach, that turns a simple conversation into an hour-long internal analysis, and transforms a minor decision into something that feels unexpectedly heavy. If you are someone who thinks deeply, you already know what this feels like. And if the people around you have ever told you that you overthink things, or that you're too much in your head, or that you need to just relax and let it go, you've probably spent a fair amount of time wondering whether they're right. Psychology, however, tells a more nuanced and far more interesting story about what is actually happening inside a mind that operates at that depth. Here's the foundation you need to understand first. Deep thinking is not the same as overthinking, though the two often get confused, even by the people experiencing them. Research in cognitive psychology draws a meaningful distinction between reflective thinking, which is analytical, generative, and productive, and ruminative thinking, which is repetitive, circular, and emotionally draining. The problem that deep thinkers face is not that they think too much. It is that the same cognitive machinery that makes them perceptive, creative, and intellectually powerful also makes them vulnerable to a very specific set of psychological struggles. And those struggles are consistent enough across individuals that they form a recognizable pattern. The first and most pervasive problem is that they find it almost impossible to be fully present. While everyone else is simply experiencing a moment, the deep thinker is also analyzing it, contextualizing it, wondering what it means, and filing it away for future reflection. A dinner with friends becomes a quiet study in group dynamics. A beautiful sunset becomes a meditation on impermanence. This isn't chosen. It happens automatically. As a background process, the mind runs without permission. Neurologically, this is linked to a highly active default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thought and mental simulation. In deep thinkers, this network rarely goes quiet, and the cost is a life that is intellectually rich but experientially distant, always one layer removed from the rawness of simply being here. The second problem is decision paralysis, and it runs far deeper than ordinary indecision. For most people, making a choice involves weighing a few options and picking the most reasonable one. For someone who thinks deeply, every decision opens into a landscape of implications, second-order consequences, ethical dimensions, and possible futures that most people don't even register. Choosing a career path isn't just choosing a job. It's a question about identity, values, and what kind of life is worth living. Ending or continuing a relationship isn't just a personal choice. It's an excavation of attachment, meaning, and long-term psychological impact. The depth of consideration that deep thinkers bring to decisions is genuinely valuable, but it also means that the weight of choosing can become so significant that it leads to prolonged inaction, not because they don't care, but precisely because they care too much to choose carelessly. Third, they struggle with a loneliness that is difficult to articulate even to themselves. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling fundamentally unseen. Deep thinkers crave conversations that go somewhere, exchanges that move past the surface and into the territory of real ideas, real feelings, real questions. But those conversations are rare, and the gap between the depth they carry internally and the depth available in most everyday interactions creates a chronic sense of isolation. Psychologists who study intellectual and emotional intensity have noted that this particular form of loneliness is one of the most consistently reported experiences among people with highly active and analytical minds, and it tends to appear early in life, often beginning in childhood. The fourth problem is that they are disproportionately affected by the suffering of others and the state of the world. Deep thinkers don't just observe injustice or pain, they absorb it. They trace its causes, feel its weight, and carry a sense of responsibility toward it that can become genuinely destabilizing. The news isn't just information to them, it's a moral and emotional event. Other people's grief isn't just something they witness, it's something they enter. Researchers studying empathic overarousal have found that individuals with high levels of reflective and analytical thinking often have difficulty maintaining emotional distance from external pain, not because they lack boundaries, but because their minds are wired to find meaning and connection in everything, including things that hurt. The result is a kind of compassion fatigue that arrives even without direct involvement. Fifth, they are deeply vulnerable to what psychologists call the gap between vision and reality, because deep thinkers can imagine things with extraordinary clarity, how people could behave, how relationships could feel, how systems could function, how life could be lived. They often find the actual reality of things quietly disappointing. This isn't idealism in the naive sense. It's the natural consequence of a mind that can see potential so vividly that the distance between what is and what could be feels almost unbearable. This gap shows up in careers that feel meaningless despite being objectively successful, in relationships that feel hollow despite being functionally fine, and in a persistent background dissatisfaction that has nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with depth of perception. The sixth problem is that they are their own harshest and most relentless critics. The same analytical capacity that allows deep thinkers to understand complex systems and see through surface-level explanations turns inward with equal intensity. A moment of social awkwardness gets replayed and dissected for days. A professional mistake becomes evidence for a sweeping narrative about inadequacy. A single unkind thing said in frustration becomes something examined from every angle for weeks. Cognitive behavioral researchers have identified this pattern as a form of hyper-self-monitoring, and it is exhausting in a way that is hard to overstate. Deep thinkers don't just remember their failures, they study them, and they are rarely kind in what they conclude. And the seventh problem, the one that quietly connects all the others, is that they find it genuinely difficult to ask for help. Not because they are too proud, but because explaining what is wrong requires first understanding it fully. And for a deep thinker, nothing feels fully understood. There is always another layer, another nuance, another dimension of the problem that hasn't been accounted for yet. Asking for support before reaching that full understanding feels premature, almost dishonest. So they wait until they understand it better, and that moment rarely comes, and the weight accumulates quietly and privately until it becomes something much heavier than it needed to be. Here is what's important to hold on to after all of this. The problems that deep thinkers face are not character flaws, and they are not signs of a broken mind. They are the shadow side of a genuine gift, the inevitable cost of a brain that refuses to stay on the surface of things. Psychology doesn't frame this as a disorder to be corrected. It frames it as a profile to be understood, because understanding is always the first and most necessary step. The mind that makes your life harder in these specific ways is the same mind that makes you perceptive, empathetic, creative, and real in a world that is full of people moving too fast to notice what you notice. The work isn't to think less deeply. The work is to learn how to carry that depth without letting it carry you under.